If you're anything like me, you have probably heard the famous line from Shakespeare's Hamlet that says, "This, above all, to thine own self be true." And let's face it, we are all trying to be true to ourselves. I try to be my best self every day. But what is self? This is where chapter 2 comes in. This chapter is considering self. In this chapter, we will look at the components of self, the sources of self, presenting yourself, the relational self, and improving yourself. So let's get started. First of all, we have to know what self is. The components of self consist of a composite of self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. Now, keep in mind that yourself is constantly evolving. Who you were when you were a child is not who you are today. Who you are today is not who you will be 10 years from now. You are constantly evolving as new experiences and new identities are shaping who you are. This is going to bring you to a place of self-awareness. Self-awareness is defined as the ability to objectively view yourself as a unique person, distinct from your own environment, and reflect. Now, one of the ways that you can engage in self-awareness is by social comparison. To put it simply, social comparison is looking at others' behaviors and figuring out, well, who am I when I compare myself to these other people? Sometimes when we try to define ourselves, we define ourselves by saying, well, what am I not? I'm not that person, I'm not that person. So when you use social comparison, you're really just trying to figure out, well, who am I not? Then there's also critical self-reflection. This allows you to say, well, how can I improve? How can I become the best self that I truly want to be? The next idea to think about is self-concept. This is your overall perception of who you are. And it's based on your beliefs, your attitudes, and values. Your self-concept is shaped by your gender, your friends, your family, and even your culture. This brings us to our next idea, the looking glass self. So, a part of you will always see yourself through the way that others see you. You have this idea that other people see you in this one way. And in turn, that becomes a part of your self-concept. So, for example, if you've always been the athlete, and everyone has always considered you as the athlete, well, that has now become a part of your self-concept. If you've always been the very studious student who always got their work done and people praised you for it, that probably became a part of your concept. So others' opinions and their ideas of you have also affected your self-concept. Keep in mind when it comes to your self-concept, there's the idea of self-fulfilling prophecies. Quite simply, this is when you start speaking these ideas about yourself into reality. So you may say, yes, I am amazing and everything I do will be beneficial for the world. Well, if you have that idea and you're very strong about it, more than likely it's going to come true. You are going to get ahead, you're going to be successful. But let's say you have negative ideas. Then you'll promote those negative ideas throughout your life. So the student who says, I'm going to fail my speech today, and then something happens during their speech, or maybe they mess up, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And in turn, when we have those negative self-fulfilling prophecies, they reinforce this idea, this negative self-concept. So keep in mind to always speak positively about yourself and say, I'm going to do well, because if you keep saying it, you're more likely going to believe it and it's more likely going to come true. Our self-concept is very influential on our self-esteem. Self-esteem is the overall positive or negative value that we assign ourselves. Keep in mind that your self-esteem will affect your communication with others. All of your interpersonal communication in some way reflects yourself. Because again, keep in mind that we still see ourselves through other people's eyes from time to time. So if you see yourself as very nurturing, then you're probably going to find other people who you can nurture. If you see yourself as very competitive, then your communication is going to reflect that competitiveness that you feel. Additionally, self-esteem can affect your health. If you've seen that person who's beat themselves up over and over and over again, and they have this negative impression of themselves, they probably have some low self-esteem issues that have affected their physicality. That person who has slumped up shoulders or tension in their jaw, those are some issues that can be connected to self-esteem. It can even be affected to your mental health. Probably the most prominent of any mental health issue that is revolved around self-esteem is depression. Usually that reflects low self-esteem in some way. Now this brings us to our next theory, the self-discrepancy theory. So we have our ideas of who we should be, the ideal, the very perfect self that we all want to be. But then there's also the ought, who other people tell us we should become. Self-discrepancy theory says that our self-esteem is affected by the ideal and the ought. That the stronger those two are apart, the further away, then we're going to have low self-esteem issues. But when our ideal and our ought are a little bit closer, they're more likely to have positive self-esteem. Now, keep in mind, you can always improve your self-esteem. So you want to assess your self-concept. Figure out, well, what am I telling myself about myself? Go ahead and make a list of those positive and negative things about you. And figure out, well, am I really as bad as I thought I am? Or maybe when I actually weigh it out, there's a lot of positives on my list. Another way you can improve your self-esteem is by analyzing your ideal self. How can you really become that person that you've always wanted to be? Keep in mind that you want to be realistic in your ideal self. Which brings us to the ought self. So keep in mind that, yes, people have these ideas of who you should become, but if those ideas aren't realistic or attainable, don't beat yourself up for it. It's okay to be just you. Another way to improve your self-esteem is to revisit and redefine your standards as needed. Keep in mind that we are constantly changing. The person that you were a month ago is not the same person that you are today. Therefore, you're probably going to have to redefine your standards and say, well, this is who I am in this moment. You can probably think about how many of your values have changed or how many of your beliefs have changed over time. And then lastly, you want to create an action plan for resolving any self-discrepancies. So when you do have those issues where your ideal and your ought don't really match up, well, how can you fix it? And once you figure out how to fix it, start putting it in action. So your source of self comes from a variety of places. One of those is your family. Your family is going to have an influence on how you attach to other people. So if you have a secure attachment, you are probably very easily connected to others. You have low fears of being rejected, and you have a strong need for intimacy. Now, if you have a preoccupied attachment, you really want close-knit relationships with others and you seek out intimacy, but you're also afraid of getting rejected. And because you have such high anxiety, it does make it harder to have the strength and the willpower to go out and have those close-knit relationships. You may have a dismissive attachment. If you have this style, that means that you see relationships as unimportant, that You believe that self-reliance is the best bet that you can possibly have. You are your own little island. And then there's the fearful attachment. So if you have this style, then you basically shun all relationships. You fear rejection. And because of that, you are again probably your own island because you're not going out and finding new people to make connections with because you're so fearful of being rejected. Another source of where we get ourselves is our gender. Now keep in mind that gender is a social construction. And what I mean by that is we learn gender. It's not just something that we are. Whether you're male or female is based on your X chromosome connection or your XY chromosome connection. But in general, gender is something that you learn. It's social, it's psychological, and it's cultural. Now, here in the US, we have 3 genders. Traditionally, people say we have 2, but androgyny is becoming more popular. So we have masculinity, femininity, and androgyny. And we define masculinity as all those stereotypes that we think men should follow. So being strong, being a provider. Femininity, we think of being soft and nurturing and seeking cooperation. And then androgyny is still being developed in this country, and it kind of seems as though it's a hodgepodge between masculinity and femininity. That in between where you kind of take from both. Now keep in mind, because gender is a social construction, other cultures have multiple genders, 6, 7, 8. It depends on the culture. Which brings us to culture. Now, there are individualistic cultures and collectivistic cultures. We here in the US are individualistic. We are all about number 1. If you want to make your own way in this world, then guess what? You need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and make it. It's all about meritocracy. If you're good enough, then you're going to get where you need to go. Individualistic cultures are all about the one person. Your needs are most important. In a collectivistic culture, for example, like Mexico, it's all about the group. The group's needs come before the one. So if you're part of a collectivistic culture, you're more likely to ask for advice of the group and figure out, okay, well, is this the best thing for me, for my family? If you think about the movie Mulan, she is doing what is best for her family. That's an example of collectivistic culture. Now keep in mind, all of these parts of our cultural identities are shaped by the social constructions that we have as our culture. So in some way or another, all of these different factors are playing out in your world and have shaped who you are and are continuously shaping who you become. So that's going to conclude part 1 of the Considering Self lecture.